Our epistle reading for October the 6th, 2024 comes from Hebrews chapter 1, 1 through 4, and 2, 5 through 12. I must admit that Hebrews has never really been one of the most exciting books for me. I got into Paul's theology in the epistles, and of course Revelation when I was younger, and John. But Hebrews, not so much. Until I took another look at Hebrews in a different way. In 66 AD, the Jewish revolt occurred. By 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. And then we have the story of Masada. This Jewish-Roman war that occurred, recorded by Josephus, talks about not only the devastation that occurred, but what happened to the Jewish people after the temple was destroyed. And there's a lot that's involved there. But for people whose center of identity in the middle of being occupied was the temple, for the temple to be destroyed was to put their faith, their rituals, their traditions in chaos and in angst. One person that I've studied has argued that this is really when synagogues began to become the central places for Jewish identity. As the temple was lost, the synagogues rose. Now, some argue that the book of Hebrews was written before the destruction of the temple because it refers so much to the temple. Others have placed it after the destruction, and I go with the idea that it's after the destruction of the temple. Because while the Jewish people turned to synagogues as their new center of faith, Hebrews says that the reason for the temple is no longer. That Jesus has become the high priest, Melchizedek. But Jesus has ended all sacrifices with his sacrifice. Jesus, who's made a little lower than the angels and humbled himself to the point of death, was then raised by God and placed at his right hand above the angels. That it is through his suffering, his redemptive suffering, that we are raised. It all centers around Jesus being the fulfillment of the temple tradition. When you begin to read Hebrews through this lens, it becomes fascinating to compare Hebrews to the temple traditions recorded in the Old Testament, and how point after point after point after point is made to say he has fulfilled every need. There's no need for sacrifice. He is the ultimate sacrifice. There's no need for a high priest. He is now the high priest. There's no need for a physical temple because he has created a temple within each of us, and the Holy of Holies, the Holy Spirit, dwells in us. For where the Holy of Holies is where the covenant is, where the commandments are. And yet, we're told that the commandment, the law, the covenant will be written on their hearts. The temple is no longer needed because through Jesus, the temple is not only fulfilled, but comes to fruition in the hearts and the lives of the believer through the power of the Holy Spirit, with Jesus as our high priest. That changes the whole perspective for me of the book of Hebrews. And so, it begins in Hebrews by looking at who is this new high priest and how he is the fulfillment of everything that was asked for in Psalms 8. Who are we that you're mindful of us? You made us a little lower the angels, and yet set us above all. And what it says here is, this is Jesus. Jesus is the one who came. Jesus is the representative of humanity. Jesus entered into the humanity and was made a little lower. And through his sacrifice and death, now sits at the right hand of the Father. And will come again with glory and righteousness. It's in Hebrews that we have the great cloud of witnesses that surround us. It's in Hebrew that we learn that faith in Jesus and entering into the mystery of Jesus is entering into the mystery of the living temple. That no human hand can destroy. For it's not made by human hands, but is eternal in the heavens. That we can come to that throne of grace and worship and pray. And Jesus, who prays for us, will intercede on our behalf. And the Holy Spirit will guide us into what we need to be praying for. And to reveal God's will to us. That whole perspective for me changes the book of Hebrews. And it makes me change my perspective on where is God. Is God in a church, a building, in a house? Is God in a book? Or is God in a living relationship with each one of us, made possible through Jesus Christ, made real for us through the power of the Holy Spirit? As grace flows in and out of our lives, and we discover faith and hope and love.